Greetings and salutations, travelers. Welcome back to the Inn of Planar Crossroads, and as always, welcome back to our Around the Hearth discussions. This time, we're discussing homely horrors. But first, in our August Abominations. But first, before we get into all that, we're going to do our introductions and announcements. So, I'll go first like normal, and then Scrat can go. And then we'll do our shout out, and then we will get our Levi spotlight, and then we will get into it. So I am Adam L. Spain with the Inn of Planar Crossroads and the Gentle Voice Ministries. You can check us out. As you can see, I haven't updated the webpage yet. It's been very busy. What with hay and then ministry stuff and all that, it's been pretty busy. So I'm doing good to get the videos out right now. We're going to focus on that right now. But otherwise, things have been going well. You can come here and at innofplanarcrossroads.com or theiopc.com, and check out the different links we have to our social medias, our links to watch our different medias, either on YouTube, Rumble, or BitChute. I keep forgetting BitChute. It's on there too. We have a Twitch that has a link here, but I just keep it active in case we need it sometime. You never know. And then there's PayPal and Locals, Subscribestar, and Patreon if you want to. So, you can check those out if you like. But that's enough from me. We also have with us Scrat from A Squirrel Plays.
That's me. I'm Scrat. Squirrel Plays over on YouTube, and only YouTube, because I guess I don't get out much. Also got a Discord, if that counts. And over on YouTube, I like to make videos about storytelling, world building, character design, and all that kind of stuff, be it for just regular good old-fashioned written stories or TTRPGs, while trying to navigate the differences between those, because there is a little bit of difference. And I also get to do some TTRPG reviews. One day I'll learn to say it. I get to do that from time to time, and that is always a lot of fun to explore. I always enjoy getting to talk about some game mechanics, and even better than that, I get to see what other people in my little squirrel community are coming up with, so that's always fun, so long as they're willing to share. And they have been. They've been sharing their own homebrew TTRPGs, and had a couple artists join lately. Actually, I should have mentioned that earlier. I don't know if you saw that. There's a guy very recent that came in, and he's got an art style I think you will like. He likes to draw some creepy stuff, and he's got a TTRPG he's working on. I haven't seen any of the rules, but his layout for his manual and his artwork is very, very professional looking. Very cool.
I'll have to go check that out.
Yeah. Spooky stuff.
Yeah.
Should have brought him on tonight.
It's a little late, Squirrel.
It is. But that's all I got.
Okay. Well, check out his stuff, and you can let us know in the comments section below if you liked the art from the artist that he mentioned. And Scrap won't tell you, but I'll tell you that he wouldn't be upset at you if you checked out the Only Squirrels tab in there as well. So,
Woohoo!
all right. That is Scrat from A Squirrel Plays, which means we are on to our Levi's shout-out, which Dan had suggested one person, but we decided to go ahead and do a different person this time because I need to look at the one that Dan... I'm not familiar with the content for the one that Dan suggested, so maybe next month we'll do that. This month we're shouting out my daughter's YouTube channel again, just because we can, you know. I don't know. It's a dad thing, you know. I refuse to apologize for shouting her out, but you can check her out. She does mainly AMV stuff. But if you do, leave a comment and say, I don't know, your dad sent me over or something. I don't know. The IOPC. Either way, she'll get a kick out of it. But that's what I have as far as our Levi's spotlight. So check her out, Kitty in Boots. I think that's everything for now, Scrat. So, grab your preferred beverage, travelers, join us around the hearth, placing your feet on the cool stone, since it is such a warm time of year, while we discuss homely horrors. Skål. All right. So, we need to talk about this. So we're going to do like last time. Dan may actually pop in on this one. If he does, we'll give him a sufficiently hard time and then let him join in on the chat. But we're going to do key points, go over some notes from Dan, and then kind of go into the open discussion. So, for homely horrors, we're talking about either rule or actually isolated type of games for people. Usually in the a lot of those really isolated ones happen in the wilderness. It's not so much that we're going to focus on as much as you're just maybe at the fringe of society, like in a small town or things like that. Those can be just right in a sweet spot. Some of the ones that you could look at as far as stories, like we talked about in the last one, The Night Ocean is one that's done by H.P. Lovecraft and Ronald Burroughs, one of those names. They worked to get together on it. It's a guy taking a vacation for his nerves at a seaside cottage that's rented out, and just to try and ease up some of the stress, and finds more than he bargains for down by the beach type of thing. So that's one. At the Mountains of Madness is one of those isolated things. It's literally one of the most isolated ones because it's in Antarctica. So if you want to do very much something like the thing is kind of like this too. You're in Antarctica. You can't just leave. So that type of an isolation thing. The Whisper in Darkness happens in a small town. It's I guess you could say it's more of a medium-ish, but it's not too bad. Oh no, I was thinking about a different one. The Whisper in Darkness does happen out in a isolated one. It's interesting because it happens just as correspondence. It's basically for, I don't know, 80% of the story. It's broken into chapters, so I can't say that. About 75% of the story or more happens, and it's through correspondence. And then only that last bit happens in the actual location. And that could be fun. Oh, I see the squirrel now.
Yeah, I forgot to change it till just now. It's progressively getting worse.
Oh, so there's that squirrel. Squirrels like you might find in A Color Out of Space, which is another one. But regarding the Whisper in Darkness one, the Whisper in Darkness happens through correspondence, which would be an interesting thing to try and pull off in a game. That's where you're maybe alter reality or something like that. Augmented reality, that's what it is, AR. Where you're presenting your players with certain things and correspondence back and forth. That could be a fun that'd be a fun game to play and do and role play it out. It'd be an almost completely role play game, but that'd be fun to try and pull off too. So don't shun that one. Then of course, Color Out of Space, like I mentioned, it is pretty cool. There's a lot of these Lovecraftian. I'll talk about that in a minute. But the Color Out of Space is about very rural Appalachia, and a meteorite comes down. People started looking at it, investigating, but it's what happens after that meteor dissolves into nothing and starts to just slowly consume everything around it in this noticeable in its effects, but not visually capturable in our eyes and in our minds necessarily. And it drives people mad and stuff like that. Worth a listen. One of my favorites. The Lurking Fear is a good one for an investigation type of game that's set in a rural area, because it's about this reporter who's investigating the Martins mansion, I believe it is, in that story. And it's interesting to see that path that goes down, because Lovecraft's not afraid to have some people die in his story. So even people that are in the story as characters, so you can check it out. Another good one, I should say. And then The Transition of Juan Romero is an interesting one in the Lovecraft and Yog-Sothoth universe, because it takes place, it's one of the few ones of his that takes place at an industrial type of organization where they're in a mine, basically. And that's where that gold mine is where it takes place, and weird stuff happens at that mine when they find a chasm that seems to have no bottom. So if that sounds intriguing, check that story out. It's interesting to kind of get that. It's a personal story, but you could easily fit several characters into it in a game. So those are some of the stories. Some key points. Isolation is going to be it's probably a lot easier to achieve in a physical way, isolating in a physical way, out in those rural areas. Something you can do on the flip side of that, though, is to, in your descriptions, instead, they are isolated, but somehow they feel crowded without help by the unseen. They feel crowded and watched and stuff like that, even though they're supposed to be alone. That's a core fear of humans anyway. So you could play off of that. The idea of homely horrors is that the safe place is made dangerous. Doing that can be unnerving for the characters, if not the players. The loss of self to the wild. So instead of having the loss of self to the din of the city, you might have a loss of self to the wild. There's always the option of blurring the dreams and reality. A cursed ancestry. Both of those are very much a key thing in the Yog-Sothian mythos, the Cthulhu mythos. And then, again, I'm going to say it, be willing to embrace the modern, because it can actually help you out, or getting a little creepy. So, those are some of my considerations. Did you want to jump in, Scrat, or do you want me to do the notes from Dan first?
Let's start with Dan, even though you said modern being creepy. I just had the sudden thought your monsters could all be influencers. Can't get any worse than that.
Cthulhu's vying for followers online so that they can revive him from Relaya.
There you go.
Cthulhu
Yep. And
Cthulhu,
the worst of them.
Cthulhu the cam horror? He's not a cam girl. He's a cam horror? Is that what we're saying now? Ugh. I hate this, and it is also hilarious.
I would say the worst one's going to be the LinkedIn influencer.
All right, so Dan's points. Isolation and or outsider coming to a small community. The outsider coming to a small community. Good point. Difficult to know access to communication with the outside world. That's a possibility. Suspicion of NPCs can be hard to tell if natural or cult influenced. That is also something you can play with, depending on what time period especially you're working in. And before people get too uppity about difficult to access, communication, there are places just where you can't get cell signal, so don't worry about pulling that on your players. Crazy locals making PC feel crazy as as the normal one. That's fun to do. That uncomfortable, awkward interactions make for fun NPC moments. Yep. Environmental hazards, traps, monsters, and such in the forest. So every landscape is the area in shadows where the monster comes from. Interesting. And then easy to use ancient burial site, old myths of the locals, going back to that cryptids thing we were talking about before. Let me see what I put over here. Oh, what are you putting over here, Scrat?
Not the comic I wanted, but you're talking about the horror cams. It's whatever. And there was a comic about Cthulhu being a cam girl because it's hard to make a cult these days.
All right. Well, sufficiently sidetracked with Cam Girl Cthulhu. Cam Thulu. All right. So those were Dan's ideas. Apparently he was thinking along the same lines of all of that we were. Oh, Dunwich Horror. I didn't say Dunwich Horror. It also takes place in the countryside. But it's a multi-angled story, so it's not quite as personal. All right. So, what you got on your notes, Scrat?
Oh, well, if you're talking about a rural area and creepy monsters, naturally tremors came up.
Oh, I guess you could set it out in the desert and just be like, yeah, let's do it.
Yeah. But, I kind of like that concept. There's something underground snagging people, and you got to, stay above somehow. That could be... I feel like you'd probably have to use maps on a VTT or something to get the most out of that, but Mike can make it work. Now, I did, years ago, in my 5e campaign, we had this section of a dungeon. It was a watery section, and I may have brought this up before, honestly. There was something in the water. They couldn't see it, but it would try and snag them and, inflict damage and stuff. But we were using a VTT, so I had maps made for them, and there was areas. They're when they first came in, there was a big waterway, and they could drain it and get to the other side. So, they're like, there's your introduction to the water. And then they got to the next section and they realized that drain and raise the water control. They're like, oh, we got to raise the water and do this stuff. And we got to use the water to get over to this other area. And that's when they got introduced to the monster in the water. And then there was just various other rooms where the water was the danger. I mean, they could stand on the ledges and everything. It was getting in the water, and they couldn't see what was creeping around in there, but there was times, they're like, okay, this is too far to jump, or we got to go down for just a little bit. And in the last episode, so you were talking about how you don't have to be spooky, you don't have to scare the player, you spook the character. So, and I had made the comment, I don't think I could ever put on a spooky presentation, and I think that was a good example of that, because it was not a spooky presentation, but they were still very in the moment because, they didn't know what was in the water, and there was something they had to deal with and get across, and they were not spooked in the sense they themselves were scared, but it was a tense situation, right, that their characters had to get through. Mm-hmm. And that ended up being one of their favorite dungeon of that whole campaign. So...
there you go.
Yeah.
Freak out the characters. Players are just extra.
Yeah.
Yes, I remember you talking about that. The monster was a rat folk with a blade on her tail or something like that.
Yep. That's it. I think she had a couple blades attached to her tail, and you had to wrap around them and spread them.
So does that mean she was a water shank? Like she shanked him from the water?
I was like, wrap around him and cut him, pull on him.
Okay, not a water.
A little more brutal.
Oh, all right. Okie dokie.
But I do, and I didn't ask this question in the last one. It's kind of one of those mechanical questions. What is just your, I guess, your personal taste here, since you're the only one here? Which HP styles do you find work better for spooky settings? Like hits and strikes, HP pools, nothing, something else.
Well, when you're doing horror and it's actually got a sanity system, sometimes the HP system is important, and sometimes because it's like having a secondary HP you have to monitor.
Mm-hmm.
Because you can be incapacitated if your sanity's too low. So you add a little bit of a different element. You can use... I don't have a huge preference one way or the other. I believe Call of Cthulhu uses a wound system.
Mm-hmm.
I think. Either that or percentage system. So I think it's a wound system, though. Just like their sanity. The thing to try and do with horror is making those two both important, because in Call of Cthulhu, if you take enough damage, I think you have to roll for a sanity check. If you're hit too hard, or things happen, it's constantly going back and forth on which one you're having to monitor and think about, and that makes for that ups the intensity, right? That ups the tension, which is where most of the emotion is going to come from for the player, because they're not actually going to die. Their character could die, and their character may be afraid, but the player is going to feel the tension of that. So that's where their emotional investment is going to come from. On the HP, I think I would do the one, if you're going to do an HP system that has wounds, I probably would do the same thing with the sanity. So whatever you're using for sanity might be a good indicator to use for, or might help you lean one way or the other on whether you're doing HP by points or HP by wounds or HP by some other method, is how I might answer that question.
Okay.
As far as my preference, I've used both. I kind of like percentages, but I also like points, and I have used wounds before. So I'm a flexible player when it comes to that.
The best kind.
Yeah. The best kind is all the kind. So, not exactly. But yep, I think with some of the points there, with the I think it's fun to think about the idea of, where is it? The uncomfortable awkwardness in the interactions with the NPC for fun moments. We can, from Dan's points, it can be tempting to get really, really serious all the time in these games. And if you're doing a one-shot, keeping the tension high is important. But if you're playing in a campaign, you want to have certain amounts of levity within the campaign. Even if it's a sum shot, you want to have certain amount of levity within the campaigns, in the sum shots, so that you're not overburdening the tension. You get to break the tension. And it can be fun little fake outs and stuff like that if you want, but it's important to break that tension sometimes.
Yeah, it was an older chat. I think we were talking about silly stuff, and very similar point. You would talk about you can't just be constantly making jokes, making the whole thing silly from A to Z. Like, if it's the same tone throughout the whole thing, right? You're just going to be monotone, whether that's always crazy and over the top or always spooky. Like, it's going to overstay its welcome. You gotta up and down, the roller coaster kind of thing.
Right. When we were doing, it was either Augustine Allusions, I think it was. We were talking about wacky and weird. Yeah. And that's probably last year's Augustine Allusions. We were talking about how that balance is there, and how comedy and horror are interconnected in the sense that it's about a lot about timing and build up. And you can have something be funny, and it could be really funny if presented the correct way, and absolutely bland presented in a different way. It's the same thing, but how you present it is going to change the tone. And it can be something simple, something that could be funny even in one sense, could be horrifying in another, depending on where you find it, what it's doing, the things that are supposed to be ordinary not being ordinary. And kind of like with one of the points we brought up before in the key points section, the safe places becoming dangerous, and the inversion of the expectation of safety. So I like the idea. I think I did this with, it was for, we did this with Avenue Studios. There was the one shot that I did, I think it was for either December last year or, it was December last year, I believe, where we did this dark type of story, because it was Dark December, and they were paranormal investigators, and they had to figure some stuff out, things like that. And there was those type of pressures in there of this investigation was what they wanted, so they were doing, that's the type of game they wanted. They were investigating all these different weird things happening in this one house. And I like, if you're going to do one-shots, especially horror one-shots, locking down the area that they can function in is very, very useful. You see this in all types of horror media. It doesn't matter where they are, they always have to end up being locked down and isolated from help. There was this movie, what was it? Room 1409 or something like that?
1408.
1408, there we go.
Yeah, because you add that together and it makes 13.
Okay, so 1408. 1408 it takes place in the city. So I guess we should have brought this up last time, but 1408 is not too bad to look at for showing someone being isolated in a room, in a hotel, and cut off. That requires a lot of buy-in from the players. There's actually a Silent Hill game that's like this too, The Room, Silent Hill The Room or something like that. But having that isolation there is easy to do when you use that type of a situation. But it also is going to not necessarily be organic. It is going to be purely supernatural. And one of the things that is helpful is, especially if you do this and you go into the rural area, is to change let the isolation be there and be expected. But also, if you start to invert that with what we mentioned on the feeling crowded even though you're isolated, you can take that isolation that might have been felt in the room or in that other thing, and instead you feel like you're constantly being watched. Some person, whoever's in the party, they move to a rural area, and it could be mom and dad and some kids, or it can be whatever you want. Maybe they move together, so a couple families move together and split up a property. Maybe they all bought it together and decided to go in. Who knows? You guys can set it up how you want. But the idea is those locals being there, and that playing off of both that crowded and being watched, as well as the suspicion from NPCs can be hard to tell if natural or cult influenced from Dan on that isolation or outsider idea of the small community. You can do that, and it's okay to be nefarious in your horror games. It's okay to allow yourself as the GM to try and push the envelope of that freaky, weird stuff happening on the outside of the focus of the players. Of the characters, not the players. The players have buy-in, but the characters are out there in the situation. So, taking back our example, people in the farmhouse, they moved, and maybe right now they're living in RVs while they could be renovating the farmhouse to move in or something like that. And maybe it's surrounded by a field that used to be either wheat or hay for animals, or however that goes, pasture land of some kind. So it's open, and especially if you have this, say it's a wide open space, it's huge space, you're already feeling like you're away from stuff. But if you're out in like Kansas on the high plains and you're renovating, and you guys are gonna move in and split the property, but first you're renovating this farmhouse, but you always feel like there's just something watching at the edge of, I don't know, the cornfield or whatever field you out that in. Something always just at the edge. That always just at the edge thing can be very useful for building and ratcheting up that tension, especially when you have the idea of if this is just normal everyday life that they're trying to work in, eventually the party splits up. I mean, we don't stay together all the time. Humans have things they need to do. And if life is continuing on and you're building up this tension all through their normal day, then this pressure, this unease can start to be filtered in to those normal shopping trips that one of them is taking while someone else is still while a couple of other people are still at the farmhouse. And the people at the farmhouse hear a knock, knock, knock at the door. While the other people are shopping, they're gone. They can't help. These two that are left at the house, they go and go to the door, but there's no one there. And those ding-dong ditch-em type of normal kid stuff starts to become creepier and creepier when everybody's separated, no one's around, you're out in the middle of nowhere. Or maybe you play off, as the GM, you play off the remarks and the small talk that the players are making as their characters. And you start to filter that in. All of those things can start to build up slowly that tension. So that's some of my recommendations on that.
Did you mention signs in there somewhere?
Not specifically, but
Yeah, is that what you were getting at?
that's what you were. I'm not surprised you got there.
Yeah. That's a good one. I like that movie. Talking about farmhouse and rural and cornfields.
Yeah,
That's a good one. That's one of my favorite, I guess, reveal is when the two goobers, I think they're just hiding in the closet watching the TV, and that's the birthday party somebody recorded, and the alien just steps out for like half a second into view. So good. Simple, but so good.
Yeah, and simple is your friend when you're messing around with horror. You don't have to be complicated, and oftentimes, if you get complicated, you start to lose people. There was this movie. There's The House on Haunted Hill is the movie. Now there's a Vincent Price black and white version. It has a simple plot of why stuff is happening and what's happening, and the end is solid. It's a solid movie for the time, especially. It had some interesting effects in it, but it was a solid movie for the time. Then you have the remake in I think it was the early 2000s or the 90s. Not particularly good. Not exactly amazing. And then there was another remake. So, also not particularly good. The House on Haunted Hill, the mythos about it is that the house is haunted. It is the house that is after you. Very much like we were talking with the dungeon thing in the city chat. That's what it's kind of like. But the original movie, I'm spoiling something from like the 40s. So, you know, it was like the 40s. No, it couldn't have. Might have been. It was like 50s or something like that. It's still black and white. The end of it is that the house wasn't haunted at all. Vincent Price, the wife and her lover were trying to knock off Vincent Price's character, but Vincent Price knew about it, so he staged this whole party so that he could bump them off instead. And he succeeds, and, you know, submits himself to a jury of his peers, he says. Type of thing. And there was no actual supernatural stuff in it. From what we understood as the viewer, we was presented as if there could be, that there might have been, until it was revealed that the wife was trying to bump him off, but he turned the tables on him. That's pretty good. That's a pretty, even if you're trying to do a Cthulhu mythos type of thing, don't be afraid to subvert the expectation that something supernatural is happening. It's okay to subvert that and say, no, there's actually not anything supernatural happening here in the sense that you think of. You can always throw in some kind of supernatural thing elsewhere that's happening that they're not thinking of. That's fine. But if you want to subvert that expectation, it's okay to. The other movies just went straight for the supernatural portion, and that was what was happening. It was like, oh, alright. That's fine if you can pull it off, but it didn't pull it off all that well. Alright, Scrat, did you have any more questions on your notes there?
I thought about asking about survival mechanics in a horror setting. That's something you prefer to deal with, or think it just bogs things down or adds to it? Survival being like food, water, sleep, those kind of things.
Well, if you're doing a one shot, it can kind of bog things down.
Yeah.
But if you're doing something where it's a sum shot, or there's a campaign, or there's an actual purpose to it, then I wouldn't say that's a bad thing to do. You got to have something. Again, every tool that you have as the GM when it comes to horror games and tension games, everything you have as the GM as a tool that can be used to help ratchet that tension is going to be something probably worth including. Like managing how much food there is. Well, that will be important if you're stuck. I'm trying to avoid the ocean because it's very easy to be isolated in the ocean. You're literally stuck on a boat. But taking that extreme example, stuck on a boat in the ocean, you're going to want those mechanics because it's going to make a big difference. It's actually part of the game. There's a purpose behind it in the game. A rule area, if you're having a sum shot there, yeah, someone needs to go for groceries. I mean, immediately that sets up splitting the party. Why would everybody go to get groceries? You're just going to the store to get milk, eggs, bread, and fabric softener type of thing. You know? That's a one-person job. So you can split the party very easily by saying, you guys are probably going to have to go shopping soon. You can't spend all your days all the time at the farmhouse. Somebody's got to go shopping. And it's okay to be like, it's okay if the players know that, and even if the characters suspect that something bad's going to happen when people split up. Well, tough. You all going to go to the store? What's going to happen? So, I think including those things can be very useful. Encumbrance can be very useful if you're out and about. Like if you want to do a hiking trip type of story that gets caught up and stuff. Somewhere Dan had something along that line. I think he's got it down in the campaign inspiration, so I won't go there yet. But doing like a camping story, well, how much food did you take? I mean, that's a legitimate question. You guys are going out into the woods. You're going to have to figure that out. You guys taking your normal amount. And you don't have to go into grainy detail. You don't want to have it so deeply ingrained in there that it's taking away out of the tension and now they're just micromanaging. But saying, you have enough food for this many days, and then that food's there. What happens when that food starts to disappear? Or what happens when people think that the food is disappearing too fast? What are you going to do with that? How are you going to play that? What's going to happen? Again, those drama points, those tension points are going to be useful for that game.
Yeah, on the note of keeping it simple, that new Easy D6 thing that dropped the Wasted World once, it added food rations and ammo since it fit the setting, and he made it super simple. You just get a I forget what he called it. I think it's just a resource. Like, it's just called resource, and you can only carry so many, and that resource can either be food or ammo, whichever you want to donate it to, and you can only carry so many, and then you consume so many a day based on what you've been doing. Like, you know, you use one resource for food, and depending on your weapon type, you might use one or two more resources, depending. So I'm really anxious to try that, but like you said, in a one shot, I'm not gonna be worried about that too much. So I gotta find a longer game to play and experiment that, because I like how simple it is, but it seems like it's like, okay, this is something I have to keep track of and focus on and worry about.
Well, it probably, if you use little tokens, especially in person, it'd probably be pretty easy to kind of keep track of. And those type of simple ones are really useful for those sum shots, especially where you're not getting a chance to really hoard up a lot of stuff. You're not getting that chance to build up months and months of ration. And it makes sense in that apocalypse that you're not. But it also makes sense in normal life. A lot of people don't have more than, well, technically, a lot of people don't have more than 3 days worth of food if you go into the city. So, you know, they usually just eat out or grab something on the way home or stuff like that. But people that live in the rural area, they might have something else in their pantry because they only shop twice a month. So there is those things to consider for your setting. But that simple way of keeping track of it as a just quote resource probably is a safe bet to start working from, at least for the sum shot. Let me see. I was just looking at my notes again.
I had an idea about finding weird mushrooms in a super rural area, and they just keep cropping up like they're following you. And then I realized, wait a minute, that's just the 80s Mario movie with the fungus.
Well, I think
fungus is helping us.
I think it was the 90s, but yes, I get what you're saying.
Yeah.
That was a... And then oh man, okay, so tangent.
It was a movie.
Tangent real quick. The fungus, I don't care if I'm spoiling this. The fungus was like the Princess Peach's dead dad devolved. Dad devolved or something like that.
Yeah, like, Bowser devolved him back into fungus.
But he was still helping her somehow. It's like, he's a fungus.
He controlled all the fungus in the whole city.
Yeah, but he's a fungus. He doesn't even have a brain. It's like, okay, movie. It's a
1993.
Okay. That was about on par for the scientific level of 1993 for some movies. So, this. Let me see. What time are we at? We probably need to finish this up. So I'm going to go to my final thought, and then I'll let you do your final thought. How about that?
Okay, dope.
All right. So my final thought is: don't be afraid to use the aliens. Alien sightings out in the rural areas. It's classic. But also, it doesn't necessarily have to be wrong in the Cthulhu/Yog-Sothoth mythos. So you could do maybe this old geezer has always been seeing stuff out there. Always seeing weird stuff in the sky. Nobody else catches it when he does, and stuff like that. Some people think he's nuts. Some people believe him, but don't know how much stock to put in it. Maybe he drinks too much or something. I don't know. But he's otherwise not fully taken seriously. Very classic. You can mess with that if you want to. And embrace those things. Or, let your player, maybe only some of your players survive, or only one of the players' characters survive. So if only one of the player characters survive, that means you can make them the old weird guy that's now out there watching them to make sure them aliens from outer space from Pluto don't come and get their brain and put it in this jar and take it off to Pluto. So that's my final thought. Use the aliens.
Well, on that note, I will bounce right off of that. So, Alien, the first movie, that's all about isolation, right? Being stuck somewhere with not a whole lot to call for help. But that inspired the video game for the Metroid series, and the one in particular I was going to say is great to use for inspiration when you're talking about isolation and being alone is Super Metroid. It's super good.
Super Metroid is super good.
Yeah. Scared the bejesus out of me when I was a little kid, but not like it doesn't do all the jump scare nonsense. Like you're just on this planet by yourself, and the music is, it hits just right. And one of the interesting things I didn't realize until much later, it still manages to do that, make you feel all alone kind of spooky thing, don't know what's right around the corner, always on your toes. It manages to do that without taking away from you, like, oh, you're about to starve to death, oh, your sanity, blah, blah, blah. Like, you have all the tools you need to stay alive. You have that suit, right, that lets you do anything and everything. But despite that, like, you're still on edge through the whole thing. Or at least that was little squirrel me.
Little squirrel. What are little squirrels called? Are they pups?
Kits.
Little kit squirrel. Scrat.
Yep. But yeah, like it just does such a good job. Like, and part of it probably was just the time, right? When that game came out. Obviously it's not going to hit the same now because it's 32-bit graphics or whatever. We're a little farther ahead than that, but like, I think that was the first Nintendo-made game that had human dead bodies in it, and that was when you turn the game on, that is the first thing you see is the scientist corpses, and then that spooky music playing, and it's just panning through the science lab with everybody dead. So right away, you're like, what am I getting into?
Yeah.
But it's a good source of inspiration if you want to try and lean into that, how to make the party feel a little creeped down and alone and isolated.
Indeed. Again, goes back to embracing the modern. You could set this way out in space if you wanted to. Same kind of isolation ideas apply. Which we did talk about in our sci-fi one, where we talked about aliens. Here there be aliens, or something like that. So, you can check that out. And I think that's pretty much our time for this one. Let me see. Next time is simply titled Hunger. Because that is, spoilers, the title of the song that Scrat wants to do a conversion on. So it fit for the theme, so we went with Scrat's idea. I'll have the lyrics pulled up next time for y'all. But until then, we thank you for watching. We thank you for sticking with the In a Planar Crossroads and coming by. Do remember you can check out these different links that are on our webpage. It is inaplanarcrossroads.com or theiofpc.com. Either one works. You can check out A Squirrel Plays, where Scrat makes videos about a bunch of different stuff. So, there's that. And then our spotlight was for my daughter, Kitty in Boots. You can check out her AMVs and stuff. As always, have a great day. God bless and enjoy. Bye.
This content was made possible by travelers and viewers like you. Thank you.
Okie dokie. Got that one. Wonder where Dan is. I'm gonna check their Rumble real quick. Pester him. My feed.
What is it, Kitty in Boots?
Yeah, Kitty, the letter N, and then Boots. Their live is over.
Well, tell him to get his act together.
Yeah. On Do Not Disturb. They might be doing some behind the scenes. I'll tag him.
She got 22 whole subscribers.
Yeah, she's doing okay. She does pretty good at matching up the beats in the, with her cuts and stuff.
AMVs, man.
Yeah.
Those has been around a long time.
Yeah.
I remember trying to make those pre-YouTube.
Mm-hmm. Those were probably some of the first pieces of media made by amateurs that really hit the internet, you know what I mean?
Yeah, some of them are really cool.
She does a pretty good job.
Say, I remember some Rammstein ones. Way back there. They had a lot of weird editing on them. There was a good Trigun one that used, can't remember what the names of the song was.